Let's take a look at your market news now. Asian markets were mostly up today, tracking another rally in New York last night following a battering on global stocks last week. While some stability has returned to trading screens, investors remain cautious as they await U.S. inflation data. Now, after national holiday yesterday, Japanese stocks started off well, but the main index fell at the close on continued fears around the potential for higher interest rates. The Nikkei share average was down at 0.7%. Hong Kong stocks had a positive day as investors sought to pick up bargains on stocks that had been heavily discounted last week. The Hang Seng Index rose by 1.6%. It's expected that trading will slow down soon in mainland China ahead of the Lunar New Year celebrations. In the meantime, the Shanghai Composite Index edged up by 1.0%. Wall Street stocks rebounded last night. Broad-based gains were registered across most sectors. This as investors appeared to regain confidence after U.S. equities' biggest weekly drop in two years last week. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 1.7%. The S&P 500 added 1.4%. And the Nasdaq Composite Index closed up 1.6%. Now, for more on the markets, we cross to Nompumelelo Siziba. She's standing by at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Good afternoon, Nompumelelo. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Nzinga. Well, global markets are generally in positive territory, and the all-share index, no exception. At some point, that was up well over 1.5%, doing quite nicely, with a broad-based increase in pretty much all the sectors. Although the mining counters doing particularly well, they were up over 2.3% at some point in the session. Oil prices, we see, are slightly firmer today, although they're not flirting anywhere near the $70 a barrel level that they were a couple of weeks ago or even a week ago. So that price has come down slightly. Good news for us as consumers, especially given fears around higher inflation globally. Not such great news for the likes of OPEC. And locally, of course, all eyes on the ANC NEC statement to come out at 2 o'clock. It's largely believed that a letter recalling the President Jacob Zuma, has been handed over to him. But of course, the ANC needs to communicate to us officially as South Africa to tell us what's actually transpired. There hasn't been any major moves on the currency. That's still trading well below 12 against the US dollar. Let's take a look at the indicators. Well, I'm joined by Chris Gilmore. He's an independent analyst. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Good to be here, Nompu.
Good stuff. Let's start with the United States. US President Donald Trump, he delivered his budget speech yesterday. He wants to shift spending more from social things like health, which is very worrying, to infrastructure and defense. Does his speech have anything to do with the general good vibe that's happening on global markets today?
I think it does, and it's nothing new. If you considered that the American Society of Civil Engineers 2 or 3 years ago came out with a very damning report on the state of US infrastructure, they reckoned you would have to, and that was 2014, I think, that's 4 years ago, they reckoned just to get up to speed, get up to scratch as to where they should be. So for anyone who's been to the States in recent years, you'll see what an appalling mess their infrastructure is, and it's dreadful. They would have to spend 4.3 trillion US dollars. That's a big figure in anyone's language. Okay, so that is going to mean more spending on, basic things like bridges, roads, all that kind of stuff, which will have secondary knock-on effects, not just in America, but in the rest of the world. So I think, to answer your point, yes, absolutely, that's going to make a big, big difference. This is a feature of developed economies around the world. Not so much in developing economies. I'm talking about countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, China, Vietnam. They've been spending in infrastructure for a long time, but the developed economies haven't been spending. So there's a huge backlog to go there. I mean, the Americans last spent big time on infrastructure in the 60s and 70s when they built the interstate highways. And since then, there's been very, very little. So there's a huge, huge gap to go. And I think it will be good for companies. They can get a slice of the action, but that will be spread far and wide.
Nicely explained. And then the oil price, I touched on it, talking about it flirting more with $60 a barrel, not so much 70 like before. That's great news for us, but do you think this trend is going to continue?
Yeah, and I think what it comes back to is if you look at when oil was pushing $70 a barrel a few weeks ago, excuse me, what happened is it encouraged a lot of the American shale oil producers to come back on stream. And to get an indication as to the activity of those guys, you look at what's called the rig count. In other words, the number of rigs that are currently active in the US. And it reached a bit of a bottom in about May last year, and it's been steadily climbing all the way for almost a year now. There's a crowd in America, an oil company, an oil services company called Baker Hughes, and they keep a very good tab on this. And I've forgotten what the exact figure is, but it's rising all the time. And to extrapolate from that, what it's telling you is that more and more rigs are coming on stream, or more and more oil wells are coming on stream, and they're producing more oil, and it's putting an actual cap on the price. So I think, again, to answer your question, is it going to be capped at around these levels? Yes, I think it probably is.
Okay. And then here at home, of course, all eyes on the ANC NEC, and they're going to give us a statement at 2 o'clock, largely believe that Mr. Zuma has been recalled. There hasn't been a major move on the currency. It's pretty much stable relative to where it was at the New York close. Your thoughts?
Look, I think once it happens, and it is going to happen, I mean, I think Zuma is going to be going in sooner rather than later, regardless of whether he wants to go or not. That's not really the issue now. But I think once that happens, we face the cold light of dawn. I've just been to a presentation about S&P and DJI, where Colin Coleman from Goldman Sachs gave a very, very upbeat and a very, very positive outlook. Well, Goldman Sachs are looking for a 75 basis point reduction in interest rates this year. They're looking for growth this year of over 2%, which in itself is not great, but relative to where we've been, it's actually fantastic. But he did make the point that, you know, trying to get out of the mess we've found ourselves in the ruinous Zuma years is a bit like unscrambling an egg. It's going to be very, very difficult and time-consuming. But I think Cyril Ramaphosa, all credit to him, I think he understands the scale of the problem, and we're at least now starting to attack it.
You mentioned off-air that we might not see budget next week.
Yeah, I think given what's been happening politically in the past few days, I think the likelihood is we may see it delayed by about a week. So it's supposed to be on the 21st. We could well see it delayed until the 28th. And I think that would give the Minister of Finance and all others concerned time to let all of the information that has been floating around coalesce. Also, you know, things have to be done. We have to see some more movement on what's going on behind the scenes. The other thing we have to bear in mind is this budget is critically important. For a variety of reasons, not least of which being Moody's, the ratings agency. They are going to give their view late February, early March, and if they can be persuaded that South Africa is serious about reversing the ruinous Zuma years, then I think there's an outside chance we may just escape a downgrade.
Very quickly, you say ruinous Zuma years. What are some of the good things you think he may leave behind in terms of legacy?
It's very, very difficult to answer that question because, frankly, I can't see many. Because during his tenure, all we saw was a continued decline in our standing in the world in virtually every single metric you can think of. So it's really difficult to actually come up with anything on the positive front.
That's the longest pause I've heard on national TV. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Chris Gilmore, he's an independent analyst. After a short break, and Nzinga has more business news for you.